Okay, is that your first driver?
For the community finance committee, 24th at 6:35 again. Okay, roll call.
Mr. Arbogast,
Here.
Mr. Brisman,
Here.
Mr. Davis,
Here.
Mr. Emhoff,
Here.
Dr. Johnson,
Here.
Mr. Kohler,
Here.
Dr. Madigan,
Here.
Mr. Miller,
Here.
Dr. Odell,
Here.
Mr. Spatz,
Here.
and joining us, Student Board Delegate Tyson Hargate.
They're on all committees now, right? Student delegates, or I don't know.
Well,
I know you guys show up your boards now.
they show up here and at CCB, and they're welcome to whatever else. Those are the two hot ones.
All right. So you can ask all the finance questions.
That's right.
All right. Item 2 is public comment. I see sign up outside. One here. All right.
No.
Move on to that. Item 3, the approval of the January 20th, 2026 Community Finance Committee meeting minutes. Can I get a first and a second?
I'll move to approve.
Second.
Oh, I probably can't.
Yeah, we switched, right?
Sorry.
You guys already approved the.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
My
you-
bad.
member.
Okay, moved.
All right, so Mikhail and second. I think it was first.
What was first?
You were first originally. Okay.
Okay.
And then
Okay, you're
Dr.
second.
So Cal, David, and then Dr. Gaines. Voice vote's good. All in favor, Dad? Aye. Any opposed? All right, that brings us to the meat of tonight's meeting, and for defending the space model. Court, I think it's pull up a PowerPoint resume. Only there.
Link.
Okay. Lisa's getting it across.
And do you want to have a student delegate introduce themselves, right?
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
So why don't we, you wanna go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah.
Drag a faster mic over.
Indeed, I think that. There you go.
Hi, my name is Tyson Kirkgay. I'm a freshman here at Opiara. And I'm here. Back in October, Miss Evans said, Tyson, I think you'll really like CFC. So that's how I see it.
But it's true, right?
It is true. I will say that, I've been in this district for 9 years. This is the most informed any student I have ever come across has ever been on any district's levy. Really quite impressive. Very impressive.
Looking at question and answer session, obviously, the community.
Yeah, but that's what I was teeing up. I was going up.
Did anyone ever ask you questions about the levy?
Not really. Some of my teachers who live in Oak Park, they asked me a few questions, but not any of my friends.
It may come up Thanksgiving dinner.
Right.
Okay, so thank you for making time for us to make the subcommittee report. You know, we sent out in March, so this is just a tool for us to be able to talk about it. So as Bob and I go through this, you know, just feel free to talk about anything that you have questions about or feedback. So first, we want to thank both Tony and Brian for collaborating with us. It's really an ideal way for us to work with the business office. I think it's a model really in the hopefully, we can share this model with other districts. We're really lucky because not everybody is really sort of digging into it in this way. And we also want to thank the board, because this is something that, they're interested in, talking about and doing as well. So, we're excited to get into this. I think, just to sort of level set, like what is tonight's purpose, it would be to inform the board discussion. So the idea is to bring this, committee report and presentation to the board. So any feedback will, we can use it for when it happens. So, and again, it's on resource alignment, equity, outcomes. Okay, here are our 6 things. I'd also like to thank Graham for sharing your PowerPoint, deck. So you'll be seeing some of this looks familiar if you have you're at the November board meeting. We're going to cover the approach that we took. Just a quick overview of what EBF is, so we're all on the same page there. Then we're going to get into our methodology of the report, findings, outcomes, and insights, and end with our recommendations and next steps. So this first section is the approach. We wanted just to make sure that we are staying in our lane. So we're going to just review real quick the charter alignment, and then exactly what was the purpose of the report. So here for the charter highlights, you can see in the top right, and I don't know if we can minimize that just so everybody can see the slide here, but yeah, so an excerpt from the charter is in the top right here. So that CFC is expected to examine financial performance holistically, as well as consider the impact of financial decisions on D200's vision and strategy. So that's one of like the 3 parts of the report is looking at that alignment with the vision and strategy. And then the bottom right, you can see specific charge from the charter is to review the district's evidence-based funding model and provide input on resource allocation. That's essentially what we're doing. So here we are with our purpose. The report has essentially 4 purposes. First is to look at that alignment between the evidence-based model and then our actual resource allocation here at D200. And the purpose there is just to identify areas where we might want to reallocate resources to be more in alignment or possibly cost reduction. Second is to assess those alignment with the board and district plan. So how are we currently looking and actually allocating for staffing expenditures, and is it what is going to get us to the things that we've set out as goals? And then third, connecting, which is really sort of like where we get to the meaningful part here, is connecting spending patterns with student outcomes. I think this is really important, and it's also groundbreaking, honestly. It's not always the way that districts are operating. And then finally, informing future resource allocation decisions. Okay, so now we are moving on to the second part of tonight, and that is the evidence-based funding overview. The parts here are going to be talking a little bit about the research base of the evidence-based funding model. I think that's important because instead of it being an opinion of what we should be doing, right? Everybody has an opinion. This is why we think the model should be followed, based on effectiveness in the search. The second is just like the history and purpose in Illinois. So EBF is not just something that is in Illinois. So we want to hone in on the history of it in this state, talk about notable exclusions, considerations for D200 in particular, and then have those key funding inputs. So we are like understanding where those are coming from. So I'm going to start with that first research base, and then I was going to finish those other points. So the purpose of the Illinois evidence-based funding model formula is to ensure that every school has the resources to get at least 90-95% of their students up to state proficiency standards. So we want them to be ready for career or college, and so essentially, this is in the actual statute to close the achievement gap. between at-risk and non-at-risk students. So I think that's really important, the sort of why behind this. So since August 31st, 2017, it has been law in Illinois, that we're using the funding model. Now, when I say we're using that, we do have to have a caveat there because it's not fully funded. So it's supposed to be fully funded by next year, it's not even close to happening. So for that reason, districts like D200, which only get about 6% of EBF money, they're sort of, they're not a mandate, right? You can still choose based on, local needs, how to do it. So when I say formula, I just want to be clear, it's not like you have this money, you must put it in this outlet, this one, that sort of thing, but it is something that we are hopefully working towards. And then finally, just talking about those high impact strategies within there. I just want to highlight two tonight that are going to be coming back up. But essentially using the money in ways that are the most effective, which means getting those students closer to state proficiency or above, would be professional development with classroom instructional coaches, and then tutoring with certified teachers in either 1-to-1 ratio or up to groups up to. So that's the current framework, and Bob's going to take over here for history and purpose.
Okay, from 1999 to fiscal year 2018, the general state aid formula was used. Won't go into detail on that, but it was modified multiple times over the 20 years it was in existence, and generally they kept tweaking it, and every time they tweaked it to fix one thing, they broke something else, and it got to the point where it was going to be impossible to fix. They were greatly underfunding it compared to their the peer, what was it called, PTAB, but there was a subgroup that was setting how much the funding should be per student, to set basically the adequacy level, and that group was estimating cost should be like $9,500 per student. The foundation level was set at $6,500 per student. So yeah, they weren't even following it. And so over a period of 3, 4, 5 years, there were lots of moves to create a new funding model. And what came out of it was the EBF, which was adopted in August 2017. The goal was to get all districts to at least 90% of adequacy by fiscal year 2027. A report just came out from the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability, Rolf Martiri's group, that shows that the current level of funding increases, it will take them till 2037 to get to that level. If they go up to $500 million instead of $300 million, it will take them till 2035. So take a couple of years off of it. So there is that context in which we're working in, is that this is also being underfunded. But the main goals of the EVF were to create a more transparent way to assess things, that the committee that I referred to, that I can't remember its name, basically EFAB, there you go, Educational Funding Advisory Board. Basically nobody knew anything about it, and school districts basically ignored it because it had no impact on their funding or anything else. And so there was no real calculation of how much the state was underfunding. And so one of the major goals of the EVF was at the very least to put numbers out on a regular basis, on a school district by school district basis, saying how much things were underfunded, in the hopes that that would move legislators to create funding. It worked to some extent, but not nearly enough, because they didn't make their 10-year goal. It was designed to create a more progressive and continuous calculation of local capacity. The old formula basically had one tax rate regardless of your tax wealth, property tax rate, It was to be used for districts and high school districts and elementary districts had different tax rate, but it actually favored split districts, which no one knows why it was, but it used to, the total tax rate for an elementary district, a high school district added up to more than the tax rate for the unit district, and people felt that needed to be fixed. And another one of its major goals was to create an equitable, stable, and predictable distribution of new dollars, which it has done. One of the drawbacks of it being more predictable and stable is that Tier 4 districts can predict that they will get almost no new dollars. On the other hand, districts aren't being threatened with losing millions of dollars. When I was on the District 97 board, there were different years where there were proposals in the state legislature that would have resulted in a $2 million loss in state funding, and they would have passed it in May with you expected to absorb it by the fall. And districts just couldn't deal with that level of uncertainty. It was causing districts to RIF teachers and then hire them back after the state approved their budget, and budget was approved late. It just caused tremendous amounts of unpredictability. And so this definitely is more stable. It also averages things like low income and enrollment over 3 years. Actually takes the higher of your current enrollment or the average of 3 years, so that if for whatever weird reason your enrollment's down by a couple hundred, don't lose $1 million anymore. It just smooths it out and either waits for it to bounce back, or over time it will gradually take it away. And as I already mentioned, to get to all districts 90%, they're $3.5 billion short. So it's not like something they can just do overnight, which is why current projections from the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability is somewhere between 3035 and 3037 is likely to be their new target. We will see what happens with that. So next slide from there. Oh, you already have it up. It's very important to note that.
Can I just ask you
Sure.
for clarity? You're referencing 3035 to 3037.
Mhm.
You literally mean like 110 years from now.
I'm sorry, 2035 and 2037. No, sorry.
I'm just wondering.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're right.
It's going a little bit.
It's going better than that. Yep. Didn't even catch that. Thank you. Some important exceptions. The EBF was designed to replace 5 sources of state funding, the primary one being general state aid, but there were a few other ones as well. But it was very intentionally decided. It excludes transportation, which isn't a huge dollar amount for the high school, but it's definitely non-zero. Capital expenditures, it has no calculation for capital expenditures at all. It does not include low incidence, high cost special education. And that one is very variable by the definition of low incidence, but can be quite large, and for District 200 sometimes can be quite variable. It also excludes food service and a couple other things that are smaller. It also excludes early childhood, which isn't particularly applicable to a high school district, but it should be noted that it excludes that. 2 major bullet points on the District 200 context is the EBF matched expenditures. The expenditures we were able to map to the 34 EBF items only account for about 70% of District 200's operating funds. And I'm not talking about, that they're over by 30%. It's that, of the staffing allocated and a few other things, only 70% of it is EBF matched items. And so it's important to remember that this is not by any means the entire budget. 70% is certainly a majority of the budget. But if you got everything aligned within EBF to their standards, you still may have major spending issues because there's a whole bunch of stuff intentionally outside of EBF. And then just again, for context, for this year's District 200 budget, it's actually only 45% of the entire budget because of the phase 2 capital projects. But you know, on an ongoing basis, probably 70% is a good estimate. Other considerations for District 200, many of which came up during the design of it, brought up by other EdRed districts, of which District 200 is a member, but you know, basically the northwest and west suburban school districts. There is a single county wage index adjustment for salaries, so that Cook County is like 1.7 or 107% of the state average. Some other districts are as low as 90%, you know, somewhere in between. Cook County is a huge county, as everyone knows. It's 5 times larger than any other county in Illinois, and it's very economically diverse, but it has a single CWI. Is that a good CWI? Maybe, maybe not. So the salaries, there was a lot of concern that you know, before adoption, is that the salary used to calculate all the dollar amounts could be lower than what a competitive salary is for North and Northwest Cook County. Yeah, whether it is or isn't is a different question, but there was certainly a lot of concern that the average salaries in North and Northwest Cook County were in excess of that adjusted salary item. And so that might inflate other things we might want to consider using our peer groups to help adjust that salary or at least get a range. One other thing of note is, as has been mentioned before, but is always worth repeating, is the EBF used a prototypical high school of 600 students. OPRF did not have 600 students. And so it calls, for instance, for OPRF to have 6 principals. That makes absolutely no sense. It also has school administrators and a separate central office and some of the roles in a single school district. The line between what's a central administrator and a school-based administrator doesn't fall as deeply into the lines. So one of the things that may need to be considered is, do you combine these items to try to get a valid comparison? Department heads are the ones we put, where did we end up putting them? But I think we moved them back and forth.
Again, who knows?
We probably moved them again, but department heads sort of neither fit under school-based nor under central office. You know, and you know, it's just one of those where we need to be careful about not jumping to conclusions when we see some of the school administration being high or the central office being high, because it may be that there's hybrid positions or something else going on there. So the other thing to note is that there is an obscure thing in there called real receipts adjustment. They knew they didn't have enough money when they passed this law. And so they basically said, your local input should be X. And I won't go in detail of how it's calculated, but your local capacity should be X. And oh, by the way, if you're taxing more than X, we don't really need you. We don't really expect you to contribute more than that, but since you're already doing it, we'll count part of that against what you should be getting. District 200 is at 75% of adequacy without the real receipts adjustment. It is a tier 2 district without the real receipts adjustment. This is, and
I'm sorry, I don't think I understand
the implications of that is.
First, I don't understand what it means, and also I don't understand the application.
Okay, first of all, for the comparison we're going to go into, it makes absolutely no difference at all.
Okay, I can answer
All right, but the implication of that is that because OPRF High School was already taxing higher than what the formula called for it to, it said, we're going to count 75% of what you are already taxing above what the state formula calls for as money we don't have to give you in the initial allocation of things in the effort to prioritize the new money to the districts that didn't have it. And this is a very arcane detail, but OPRF High School was one of the poster children for why this got introduced. And so it's important to remember there's still one of the highest adjustments in the state. But it does mean that until they get closer to full funding and can remove the real receipts adjustment, that local property tax relief is much less likely to be able to come. I think it's $22 million adjustment that without real receipts, state should be paying about $22 million more. That's not going to come anytime soon. But again, that's part of why property taxes in, Oak Park and River Forest need to remain relatively high, because when the formula was done, it was locked in. The expectation was by 2027, they would reach full funding and they could phase out the real receipt adjustments. Now that we know it's not happening by 2027, it has to go into the appropriate fiscal planning in a different way. Again, that doesn't impact any of the comparison aspects, which is comparison to adequacy, but it does impact how much District 200 to a certain extent needs tax, because if it cut its taxes at this point, the state isn't going to make it up, because that's not the way the formula works. But part of that was back in 2018 or 2019, District 200 was able to get a property tax relief grant. Do you remember the magnitude of that? It was 5 million, something like that. I don't think it was that. 3.2. Okay. So, it did acknowledge the fact that it was getting this real receipt, and it did get a $3.2 million property tax relief grant, but it's no longer at the top of the list to get property tax relief grants. And in fact, in 2026, they zeroed out the property tax relief grant anyway. So, yes, you have a question? No, okay, plenty. You got plenty. Okay. All right, next one. While many of the elements were set by evidence-based modeling done in other states, and had research bases and a few other things, that were key inputs that were set by state averages. Steve and I calculated some of those. Steve pulled them when he was working Forecast 5. Salaries are based on the state average. They're not based on any type of educational research that says, here's the level you need to be paying teachers to retain them or to have good quality or anything else. It was a state average adjusted by what county you live in. Benefits, 30%. Flat rate, it was an average. People sort of nodded their head and said, yeah, that's a reasonable number. But for instance, it doesn't separate out the two major components of benefits, which are per FTE benefits, primarily medical insurance, and then per dollar benefits, which are primarily retirement. Retirement 403Bs, IMRF, Social Security, etc. And so when that number is off, you don't know why it is off. It is just, it's 30%. You're above or below average. But you don't really know, is it your health insurance, is it your retirement, is it the number of staff you have, is it the amount of staff you have, et cetera. That's what we're going to need to look at your districts as well. Substitutes is another one that I did not realize until we were reviewing this. the substitute calculation in there, in the EBF, is for people's sick days. If someone is on unpaid leave, the EBF doesn't count that, because if they're on unpaid leave, you can use regular salary to cover it. But after checking with Brian and Tony, the numbers that District 200 has for substitutes includes all reasons for substitutes, from, people just taking a day or two off, people being on unpaid leaves. I think it's considered a substitute if someone isn't hired till mid-September. If someone leaves early, you'll have days, months of days, and dozens and perhaps hundreds of days of someone showing up as a substitute in the District 200 records, and it will make it seem much bigger than the substitute number the DBF calls for. But that's not necessarily because people are using more sick days. It's because the substitute number in there isn't including leaves and other things, and that's one we'll just have to figure out how to report on. And then there are 4, 5, 6 things that are per student expenditures, which were just done by state averages: central office, operations and maintenance, student activities, assessment, instructional materials, and weren't based on any type of evidence, research into what percent of your budget should you be spending on student activities. It just said, here's what people are spending. That okay? Again, the EdRed districts felt that many of the things, particularly student activities, were too low, because the northwest suburbs tend to have more student activities, but when you're looking at a state average, that's what it ended up being. And so that's some things to keep in mind as we're talking about them. There's a definite difference between the research-based elements of the funding and the state average ones. But the state average ones, we need to decide what we should be comparing ourselves to. State average is certainly a starting point. We may want to think about compared to a peer group, you compare it to something else. So that's the summary of that stuff, and then it goes over to Michelle for, I think, the rest of it.
Okay. Okay, so we're at the methodology portion. So we wanted to use what exactly we do in this report. So the data that we used was from that adequacy target cap analysis that came out of the business office here. It's very helpful because it's in a format that aligns with the evidence-based funding model elements, and you can see exactly how many FTEs we have versus what the model says, and same thing expenditures. So that was the data that we used, and we're also thankful that we had the backup of the people behind it to check, where categories. So that was done over a few months, and then we're looking at sort of in terms of inputs, regional cost adjustments, and student counts. As Bob mentioned, that really does affect the model. And then, what is the actual sample? We have about 3,300 students. This is an average daily attendance. This sort of number, it's not like actual number of students, so just to be clear there. And then you have about 420 employees and about $72 million in expenditures. So in terms of data analysis, we really just are interpreting that target gap analysis. So, the business office did the actual analysis of numbers. We're doing the interpretation and then connecting it to the research. So I hope that that is the value add for the board, so that you can sort of follow along why it might be important to align to the model or not based on the research. And then obviously, connecting to the board priorities, and then finally to student achievement. And as Bob mentioned, there are limitations as in direct funding that's done outside of the model. Okay, so here we are, key findings. Okay, overall, D 200 is significantly above evidence-based funding adequacy. So for staffing, we're at 117% and expenditures, we're at 137%. So what this means is 60 FTEs, so 60 people or full-time, positions, however you want to look at it, and then about $19 million of the difference. So what does this indicate? It indicates that we do have a really strong resource base, so we are really thankful to be in that position currently. Why is there a difference? Well, we have higher salaries. I mean, that's really the take home there. You can see otherwise staffing and expenditures would be closer together, like they would be both 117, right? But we have higher salaries than the average state salary that's input. And then our staffing choices, we have decided to staff 60 more FTEs than the model has in it. So what this means is we have an opportunity, maybe for reallocating for greater impact. That would be, key. And then maybe possibly for areas for savings. Any questions on that overall? Okay. So now we're getting into core staffing. So there's those three categories, right? There's core staffing per student and then allocations for struggling students. So for core staffing overall, we're at 103% of adequacy. I mean, that's pretty close. Difference of about 8 or 9 FTEs, and then the expenditures are at about 130 with $7 million difference. So it does indicate overall, like these are your core teachers, right? Core staffing, and other elements. But our analysis shows that there is internal misalignment. So the drivers here that we looked at and we're analyzing this in terms of what it means is an over-investment in non-instructional roles and an under-investment in instructional supports for students. So that means that resources are not consistently aligned to instructional. And here's some of the backup for this section. So you can see the first section at the top is over allocation. So we have supervisory aides and school site staff are at 229% and 191% adequacy. And together that's about 37 FTEs. This is just compared to the model, right? So every district can make the decision, but this is what it looks like here. So under allocation, you can see we're under allocating in teacher tutors for students. That's the ones that will be like during the day. Librarian aides and librarians. And that in the report you can see because of our size, we might just have, an advantage. So we might not need as money, right? If I was talking about a 600 person school, we would want a librarian each thing, but now we have we just might not need as much. So instructional facilitators, though, is another story. These are coaches for our teachers, and that's the other high effect size. So the two pieces on this slide that we saw at the beginning of the presentation were the core intervention teacher tutors and instructional facilitators. We're about 20 FTEs under for those positions, for those really high effect size positions. We are also under for nurses. Then you can see that final category. We're near the target for core teachers, guidance counselors, specialist teachers, and school administrators. And I just wanted, there's asterisks at that last row for school administrators because, and Bob alluded to this. So while principal and assistant principal staffing is at 72% adequacy, we still have like 6.4 FTEs of those division heads that are in central office. So overall, you're going to be near the target for a principal. So that's why that's in that section. Any questions on board? How it's allocated or
Nurses are much like librarians that, you know, if you're assuming you have one per building of 600, do you need 5 in a building of 3,000 or 5.5 in a building of 3,000? I don't know the answer to that, but, you know, for some of these that are low numbers of staff, because they were assuming relatively small schools, you couldn't really have in the prototypical school, they didn't want to say, well, you should have 0.85 of the nurse. They said it should be 1 nurse in a 600. You know, so there's some integer arithmetic working here where there may be some economies of scale.
That's it.
Right.
That's it.
The economies of scales with things like librarians and nurses, but it does need to be looked, you know, looked at.
Yeah, so, go ahead.
Nope. I didn't. Just a clarifying question on school administrators here.
Yes.
Tony, I know some point in the process, I believe later in the process, we reviewed what you've already brought up a little bit with division heads, and I believe, but my memory is hazy here, and I haven't pulled it up, that we moved division heads into the principal role because we argued that most principals, assistants, they're evaluating teachers, but here our model is division heads are doing that fundamental task. It's a principal-ish role. So my question is, are division heads included in that school administrator category?
So they, in these numbers, they are not, but I think when we talk, you know, I think they actually might have expanded in here, then we moved them, could move back, right? But I
Okay,
think
good
that
case
they're
for both,
doing the job of here, like they should be here.
And I also,
That's fine. Thank you.
you know, this may be a point where you allocate them 50% to school and 50% to site because, or to central office, because they may be doing some curriculum work that is more common. Again,
Yeah, I
it's,
think they belong in the school administrator
Yeah.
role, but they're building it, sure.
Right.
Okay, so our
But
key,
good, okay.
yeah, I
Thank you.
totally agree. Our key recommendations here are to investigate, reallocating resources towards both those instructional facilitators and for teacher tutors. And then also evaluate decreasing spending on supervisory aides and school site staff to align more closely with the hub. So again, these are all just like points for discussion, obviously for the board. Okay, that second category.
One quick comment here too, just on when we look at supervisory aides and a couple of the other spending categories, just as the board sees kind of weighs all of the input, is the EBF model doesn't necessarily take into account a building size, it revolves around the student size. So the kind of the volume of square footage that we have tends to lead to higher categories as well.
again, that's one where we may want to compare to the peer groups, some of which have buildings, you know, this size, because that may be a place where you get diseconomies of scale. Where in a 1 million square foot building, you have a lot of exits, which is good, but that may mean that you need more supervisory people. In the 600 person building, you could have the central office secretary sort of watch who comes and goes in a way that just isn't possible in a 1 million square foot building.
I have a clarifying question. You know, when we were first going through this model years ago, and we were trying to figure out where staff should be allocated to help kind of calculate this internally, we erred on the side, and I think you spoke to this earlier in your initial introduction. We erred on the side of including, actually, I think you did the 70%, way more than the 70% that you're now articulating of our dollars were going into EDF, right? Because we were putting a whole bunch of staffing in here that weren't really appropriately accounted for in the model. And so I think I do want to clarify, it's really underscoring the point that is, I think, at the core of the presentation. The 36.5 FTE that are in the over-allocation category, that is after the cleanup that I've just described. Correct?
Yes, it is.
So there's no over
That was-
count,
Yeah, we took out food services.
yeah, all that stuff. Okay, thanks for that.
Where would the deans be? Sorry, would the deans be under the school administrators category?
In central office.
Wouldn't they guidance counselors? What are the teams considered? Oh, they were in my day, they were the guidance
That's
counselors.
exactly right, that's the old model. I believe that they probably should be in that category too.
They're in the assistant principal category right now.
Oh, okay, then they are, yes.
The voice from inside.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, oh, go ahead.
What are we doing with libraries over the next 20 years as people start to use less libraries? Don't have books. And, I mean, I think now students have everything on their tablet, laptop, right? So I don't think we have to have a fully staffed library at some point.
Yeah, in the report, we do not recommend changing the library roles from what they are right now. I think libraries are being used in different ways.
Right.
You still need staff.
Still need staffing, but it's not a thing of they all need to be, you know, National Science Connecticut libraries only like 10 of those around their 5. Need probably 1 or 2 with a leader, and then some tech help and whatever else.
And you'll see that that's basically what it is. Librarians are 36%.
Yeah.
And so it's probably 2 library science professionals when the model is calling for 5.5. That would be my guess is at 36%.
Okay, so then on to per student resources, and so we're at 130% of expenditures, and I just want to talk a little bit about this. I don't have a next slide that, you know, marks out the details, but it is in the report. So essentially, let's talk about assessment. Okay, so assessments are 147,000 above target, but we just really recommend diving into how the dollars are being used. To better understand and evaluate. We're not like, oh, that's bad, or anything like that. It's just like, let's look at it. Let's take a 3-year rolling average, right? Because it might just be, oh, it's just like this year, who knows, right? So all of this is not really passing judgment. We're saying, oh, we're curious. Why is it like this? And then do we want to keep it like that or change? For central office, it's 3 million over target. And 185% of adequacy by expenditure. So again, we recommend looking closer at resource allocations for central office to identify possible efficiency, and then this brings up the department heads, so maybe reclassifying them. So it might just be the definition, you know, issue there. And then instructional materials, I have that as an asterisk as well, so it's 590,000 under target, or 48% of adequacy, and we recommend presenting this number with and without parent fees to get a better idea of actual costs. So you might actually be pretty on target if you include parent fees. I'm not sure, we just want to look, and again, having that 3-year average, just to smooth out anomalies. And then finally, those student activities is fairly close to the adequacy target. We recommend an exploration of the budget expenditures to make sure we're allocating the funds efficiently and effectively. We also recommend presenting this amount with and without parent fees to identify the full cost, right? So we understand it's not coming out of our pocket, but it's coming out of someone's pocket, right? So just that's a look at that. And I think you also mentioned at one point in one of these meetings, Graham, about who is participating, right? Who's benefiting from those dollars? I think it's really important in terms of equity that we are really assessing, okay, we have this great thing, are we using it? Who gets to use it? Who doesn't? That sort of thing.
And just one quick thing is that there was discussion during the creation of the EBF whether or not parent fees should be considered local capacity, because some districts have 0 capacity to have parent fees because 90-something% of their kids are in free and reduced lunch and are required by state and federal law not to pay parent fees. In districts like Oak Park, there's a mix of things. But the parent fees are not part of local capacity. But again, presenting the numbers, all the expenditures net of the parent fees makes it seem like less is being spent than the adequacy model calls for. And again, that's one where sort of want to see what's coming out of you know, the EBF funding and property taxes from a board point of view, but from an expenditure point of view, the more apples to apples comparison would be with parent fees not subtracted out from it, because that's going to be, you know, again, the expectation of the model. And then maintenance and operation is another one where it is possible that because District 200 hasn't had bonds forever until very recently, that there are some expenditures coming out of maintenance and operations that in other school districts might be coming out of capital funds. Therefore, would not be included. Again, it's one of those where you want to sort of see what's in maintenance and operations that in all districts would be in maintenance and operations, just because of where the cash happened to be sitting, maybe inflating that number. Look at, of course, they're saying, oh yeah, we're spending way too much on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's based on, you know, the gap analysis, it's $903,000 over target, or 117% adequacy. So just in terms of the staffing portion of these expenditures, that's 51 FTEs in this category, accounting for 9% of all FTEs in D200. So since the national average is closer to 4% of the budget expenses, we recommend identifying any special circumstances that contribute to the cost above state averages, and if not, how to bring the budget expenditures closer to the adequacy target. I'm not sure if it's in the report, but there is a link in the report to the Wyoming adequacy report, and that is just, you know, 150 pages. If you really want to get into M&O, there's more there, and the research and national averages and whatnot. And then finally, for employee benefits, you know, the cost for the model is at 30%. D200 budget expenditures for benefits is about 12 million, which is, or it's actually about 13 million, which is 4 million over the adequacy target, or at 146% of adequacy expenditure. So this is likely due to a combination of higher salaries that are assumed in the model and higher FTEs, and no recommendations being made to change benefits at this time, but investigating a breakdown between per FTE based cost and per dollar based cost. And looking at, you know, peers. Okay, the final section of the key findings here is on the resources for struggling students. And so we're at 180% of staffing and 216% of target for expenditures. So overall, you know, we are well resourced, but maybe not optimally structured. This is just, you know, we're at the curious stage. We're not making any judgment, but our key recommendations would be to reallocate low income and English learner investments to include all elements of the categories. So you do have a teacher, but you don't have some of the tutoring support and extended day and summer school. And then reviewing the pupil support staff category and reviewing special ed staffing allocations. So I think the key takeaway for us for resources for struggling students here is the underinvestment of tutoring, extended day, and summer school. So that's just something to really think about, you know, in terms of how we want to address equity in.
Right. One other thing was mentioned in previous meetings. EBF uses the Department of Human Services measure of low income as opposed to free and reduced lunch. And District 200 has a much larger difference in this than most other districts. It's like 10% for the DHS number and nearly 20% for free and reduced lunch. So part of what has to happen here is defining what struggling students are. Again, the model for simplicity used poverty as a highly correlated number with struggling students, but when your poverty numbers are off by 500 something students, we need to figure out how to define struggling students to figure out what it is that the goal of the struggling student resources is to provide the necessary resources so that struggling students can reach proficiency. The number of struggling students was very intentionally not tied to test scores or anything else because lots of reasons for it, but it just wasn't going to be viable. But at a single district, trying to define what your need is for struggling students, how many have high need, how many have medium need and low need, is going to be important for determining if, in fact, there is over allocation of resources or if the state formula just underdefines struggling students.
Might have been vague what you just said, my apologies if I missed it, but the special education staffing level, is that determined based off of student count in the schools? So it's not at all.
So it's.
So that's a state average one, right?
Yeah, it's 14%.
That's
I believe you
exceptional.
were-
We're right around that. Well, we're a little bit above that. We're
Yeah.
By 2 or 3 percentage points.
Yeah,
That's right. But we're not as far off as I would have guessed. But there are some other comparisons to look at, so thank you for that.
Yes.
Thanks for that.
yes. Okay, so outcomes and insights for, I'm gonna go through a little quicker because I want us to have more time to talk, discuss amongst ourselves. So we're gonna look at whether the model is aligned with board priorities, whether our resource use is aligned with our board priorities, and then how we're connecting this to student performance. So the EBF framework itself provides a research-based approach to aligning district resources with strategic priorities. So directing investments towards high-impact instructional supports and targeted services for students who are struggling. So if we implement it with fidelity, then it can strengthen student outcomes while advancing D200's long-term equity and financial sustainability goals. And the EBF model is implemented with fidelity, it can actualize D200 board and district strategic. So what I've just done in these couple slides is highlight the parts that really could be served if we were in a little closer alignment. So in terms of priority 1 for racial equity, it really would address the elements for struggling students that would move the needle, and it would address the elements for teachers to help those students. And it would also be data driven, right? So this equitable distribution of resources, I think this is a really key place. We already have transparency, which is amazing. This is moving us to the next stage there. And then priority 2 for transformative education, moving those growth targets, both overall, right, for math, reading, and writing, but also for ELL students as well. So it's very aligned there. And then finally for priority 4, operations, facilities, and finance, ensuring that we are spending equitably, we are transparent about it, and we have long-term technology planning. That's sort of embedded in the report, but you can see that we're pretty much right. Okay, so that's what the model's alignment is. This is our current alignment. So on the left, you do see that we are aligned with the strategic plan in these ways. We are fully staffed for core and specialist teachers, guidance counselors, and building leadership. We have AP and dual enrollment opportunities available in core subjects to meet gifted students. We have specialist staffing allowing core teachers 2 planning periods during the school day. We have strong investment in professional development, instructional materials, assessments, tech, student activities and operations, and we fully staff English learner core teachers, special ed teachers, and psychologists. So I think it's important to celebrate those things that we, where we are aligned. On the right side, there's some areas that we could improve on. We do not have an instructional facilitator program currently that would support ongoing embedded teacher coaching. We are limited in staffing for intervention teachers or tutors to support struggling students during the day. We have an over-reliance on classified staff, meaning clerical insecurity, resulting in a 10-to-1 student ratio. We have insufficient research-based supports for at-risk students, and we have an overuse of instructional assistants, which is not considered a research-based instruction strategy. So I'll just pause there.
I believe this was created or finalized just shortly before this meeting. Could we get this? Cause we don't, this isn't in our packet.
Oh,
I sent it
I just sent it.
about 45 minutes ago.
Oh, I apologize.
Graham, I opened that, I did not see that in that link, but I'll keep.
There's two, well, I forwarded.
What I missed.
I realized it's so hard to read this. screen.
Yes, the orange, I'm gonna change it.
No, the colors are fabulous. The colors are good.
The white
Take a
one.
round. Well, it's just that difference between what's on a screen and what's in
Yeah.
One question for you, Greg, is we were talking about which bucket division heads fall into. I'm wondering if you had to call out that we don't have instructional coaches, if that's another role that the division heads are functioning in, that some portion of their administrative time covers that.
You know, two things, so, sure, of course, right, division heads play that role to some extent, although, I don't know, verbatim the research behind the EDF model, but best practice is to separate
Peers
evaluation
rather
from
than
coaching.
evaluators.
Yeah, sure.
And so, we are keenly aware of the, well, the first two things that have been talked about. Even at a recent board meeting, and we do so again in May.
Okay, and then why does any of this matter, right? Are the way that we are spending our staffing dollars and other expenditures, are they connected, right, to student proficiency? So if 90 to 95% of D200 students were meeting state proficiency standards and other performance metrics, we would not recommend any changes to resource allocation. Currently, though, the 2025 state report card reveals overall that D200 proficiency levels are at 64% for math, 73% for science, and 79% for ELA. So those are the percentage of students who are meeting state proficiency. So those are above state averages, but below desired targets. While those percentages are well above state averages, and the corresponding student growth percentiles are also above the state average, we should be aiming for higher overall proficiency for our students to be college and career ready. You can see that our rate for post-secondary community college math remediation is at 28%, which is some area that we can grow. And most, I think something that we really want to address, most time sensitive, is our significant achievement gaps in proficiency by income and race. So the biggest gaps are evident between white students compared with Black and low income students. You can see that on the right, how that looks overall. Our average is that dark blue bar. But then when we're looking at our students who are coming from low income backgrounds, that's the orange bar. The difference between the blue and the orange is not where we want to be. And then the last four bars are differences in race. So, I think that this has been identified, this is not new, right? But it's like, what are we doing about it? And are we then connecting resources to what we want to see changed and improved? And our spending levels are just not translating proportionally to outcomes. So I just want, to end this section by saying that more spending doesn't necessarily mean better outcomes. It's how you're spending it. So I think that's why we're advocating for those research-based elements to meet struggling students' needs. And then we'll end here with the recommendations and next steps. So we're shifting from a level of spending to, well, we're hoping to shift from a level of spending to effectiveness of spending. So we have sort of a little timeline there. So short term, we'd love to see expanding instructional coaching facilitators, implementing high dosage tutoring, And then sort of an overall approach, to address at-risk and struggling students' needs. And then rebalancing some of the non-instructional staffing. Long-term, we just need a plan, right? We just need to develop a 3 to 5 year implementation plan that we believe aligns with T200's needs. And the board, you know, can define those acceptable adequacy ranges, right? We want everything to be on the pinpoint of 100% of adequacy. That's probably not gonna, you know, be appropriate, but there should be ranges. And I'm prioritizing equity-driven, evidence-based investments. And at the end of the day, it really is gonna probably be about reallocation, not totally like reduction. Reallocation will improve outcomes, equity, and sustainability. Just sort of next steps in terms of, this was added after personally has sent this out. You know, how we get there, right? What the board's role is, and then, you know, how you want CFC to support you. And then thinking about working between board and administration. Bob has, you know, 2 other attachments that are, you know, really detailed in terms of approaches for workflow for this. You know, who wants to do what, in what timeline. So we're just want to open it up for discussion and how you think this could most effectively move the board.
So I've got a clarifying question before we go into the real convo. This is basically just laying out those ways where we can refine how we're calculating models to have to be closer to reality. Is that what this is?
Yeah, so this last slide, Bob, you were thinking about, okay, well, that's fine, we do want to know how we are compared to the EBF, but then how we also compare to our peer districts, right? And what are the targets locally that we're looking for? Maybe it's not appropriate, maybe we don't want, I don't know, whatever it is. So these are some of the areas that maybe should be prioritized.
Right, and, you know, for instance, like defining districts target ranges, again, getting to exactly 100% doesn't make sense, but thinking about it sort of as white lines and guardrails. You know, if we're between 90 and 110, let's not spend a whole lot of time on it. You get out to, you know, 75 or 125, you're bouncing up against the guardrails, and, you know, if you're less than, you know, something, you're over. But to do that, you have to get to district specific things. And this would also be the place where you might redefine job positions for more transparency. So for instance, where the EBF calls for student counselors, you know, what are they called? Are they called counselors here?
Indeed they are.
Indeed they are now, okay. That's a bad example, but yeah, assistant principal and principal, right.
Yeah.
Assistant principal and principal, you may say, okay, this is what the model calls it, here's what we call them. You know, that body of work at District 200, so that the public can say, oh, now I understand why you need to have 10 of these, and so forth. You know, and that's also where you talk about, you know, do you combine central office and, you know, full administration, or where do you draw that line? Student assessment, you know, expenses fall into that category as well. Of, you know, if there's a reason why you have more assessments, that's not necessarily a bad thing. In the scheme of the dollars, you know, it's not that much, it just happens to be something that's, you know, over on you know, absolute amount, not necessarily a big material difference in the budget. $72 million budget, the amount to spend on assessments isn't really that material, but it is just sort of a white line type of thing of place where we get savings or get a lot of value out of this. Either is very possible. You know, what is the district's, you know, the board and the administration believe on those, so that this conversation doesn't have to happen every year. you have it once or twice, sort of say, okay, here are the new district targets, and then review it every 5 years or something like that to say, should the district targets change? But the administration and, the CFC provide oversight of, what do you, between the lines on and what do you hope it wants.
Okay, so opening it up for comments, questions. Yeah.
I have some summary comments, but I want to wait and let the CFC members address first. Was there? Well, two presented,
Yeah.
you are left over, I left the room, so.
Rock, paper, scissors,
Steve?
Sure. No, I appreciate Michelle, all the work that went into this. Clearly it was a big lift. I guess I'm less interested in talking through the elements of it and more talking about the vision for using it going forward, what the board sees as their next steps, what might come back to us, and just more the strategy of building on it, so that it's not just something that gets filed away.
That'll be part of my comments. Cal, any questions or observations about this report?
I like it. I appreciate you guys doing it. Seems a little archaic. And I think between professional staff, school therapists, things like that, nurses, and librarians, I think the numbers are going to be different in the coming year just because of their different roles. Nurses are still needed because now they're actually giving kids medicine, diabetics, things like that, but less of the things that therapists or school psychologists kind of take care of for the most part. Then I think librarians will be smaller staff, but more specialized, not just a bunch of librarians. So, but my question is, with all of this, how many students can the school hold? Did you say over allocation, under allocation, things like that? So did you guys come up with a number like that as far as
This is proportional,
proportional? Okay,
so it's just based on the number of students.
that are here now.
Yeah, that are here now.
Okay.
The type of students,
And is noted at the top, it doesn't deal with capital at all, so there's no calculation of how many students per square foot or anything like that. That's not part of the EDF. Hopefully at some point the state will look at capital expenditures, but I'm not holding my breath.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah. This is the only discussion item. It's all in this part. Yeah. Well, no, because Steve asked a question. Now I have the same specific question because it's like, also leave that down. There's a mention of like a presentation to a board at some point. How that layers it.
I mean, I have many things. I think, I know, Graham, you have some comments prepared, so I'm gonna let you speak first, but just, the two things I would say first is just thank you so much for all of the work, and I think especially the framing and the presentation is really, really helpful for us in terms of thinking through how might we use this to inform the ongoing conversations that are happening around some of the strategic goals, around the equity gaps, around the, if you paid attention to the last board meeting last week, we had a pretty extensive conversation around a community petition that had called for additional supports for, what the EDF refers to as struggling students, really similar kind of, loud and clear message from many members of our community. So I think there's a nice convergence here between some things we've heard from the community, some things we know we're working on because of the strategic plan, and some learning that bubbles out of this way of analyzing the funding, that I think we can pull those pieces all together in a way that may be really powerful. So I think this is really great. And then in terms of a conversation at the board, what Graham and I had talked about is, having this deep dive conversation here to sort of get the feedback of the CFC in order to kind of frame and raise the possibility for bringing the full report to the board, which I think would be really good. I think, as you identified, it'd be good at some point. I can't imagine what that meeting would look like, but it'd be good to go through kind of bucket by bucket, all 34 of the buckets, and understand, we know, right? We know in the security staff or the building staff category, because the building is bigger, exactly that work that you talked about, which is, let's really specify, move beyond the tool itself and think about, for our district, what do we need? So I think you've laid out an ambitious work plan for the board, but I look forward to work. So with that, though, I'm gonna hand over to Graham.
So I say as well, thank you so much for this work. I mean, this is a lot of fantastic effort and analysis. I think the power of this work is its ability to connect our district goals, our strategic plan, our priorities, our desire to address the opportunity gap with what the research says are the best strategies to address student outcomes and issues of equity. We're calling this an EBF report because we just happen to be using EBF as the reference or the framework for that. But to me, the real power of this is connecting what we say we want to achieve in student outcomes and equity, and what does the research say are the best practices and best strategies to solve those things. And what's interesting and what really pops are two primary strategies, which is instructional coaching and tutoring of a specific type. And the actual full report does a really good job of providing the definition for that tutoring. We know that there's currently a reboot going on right now with instructional coaching. That is very much on administration's radar. On the tutoring topic, I'm not 100% clear on that. So we're looking at these things between the connection between goal and research. We're using the EBF framework as the reference point with all of its well-acknowledged imperfections. We talk about that every time we discuss the EBF board table is, hey, this is a blunt instrument. It's an imperfect tool. It's got 32 cost buckets, some of which aren't relevant to us. It uses statewide benchmarks for cost, which isn't really relative, but it's irrelevant because we have more of a metro Chicago area cost basis. But nonetheless, it's a useful framework in the absence of anything else. And I'll also acknowledge that because of those imperfections, I don't think any of this report is saying that we are doing something wrong per se. You do a good job of highlighting things that warrant further investigation. The one that comes up all the time is the number of our security staff, but as Tony said, you've got 1 million square feet. You've got a bunch of different athletic field properties. You also have a very high level of programming outside of the regular school day, in addition to all this space, and that requires a lot of security presence. So that's an example of something that there could be good explanations for stuff like that. The good news here is you've identified that we are fortunate to have the resources we have. It is now just a question of how do you optimally structure those resources in order to meet our district goals, priorities, and strat plan. And the other part of the good news is that those two lead strategies, it's not like, oh, that's going to require 2x your operating budget. The numbers we're talking about are manageable in terms of shaping and directing them. And that effort around optimally structuring the deployment of resources around the right strategies, I think goes hand in hand with our already established landmark initiative to address priority 1, which is the honors for all program. grants. So we've got that programming plus this opportunity to optimally structure resources. I think I mentioned to some of you that timing is everything, because this work by the EBF sub-team was actually commissioned in November of 2025. We received, as you all remember, a verbal early readout of that work in January, and then for whatever reason, just the quirks of the schedule, we didn't have to meet until now, April. You think about what goes on in the school calendar and where this very profound work could have some obvious tie-outs. One is staffing for the coming school year. We've already had our staffing report for the coming school year. We haven't yet had, I believe it's coming in May, is a significant report from Dr. Hester, who's our new assistant superintendent of teaching and learning. And she's had a very positive impact so far, but she's still in kind of a baseline assessment of where we are, where we need to go. That's right. So to answer your question, okay, where do we go from here? What do we do with this? With your blessing, what I'd love to do is send the report and the slide deck to Dr. Hester and allow Bob and Bill to talk to Dr. Hester, allow her to talk to those two. If there's any questions or any tie-outs, I think it'll be fascinating. I don't know what's coming from Dr. Hester, but it'll be fascinating to see where the synergies might be. So rather than two parallel paths, I think it'd be great to connect the parties and the analysis. The other thing I think Kathleen is with me on is the idea of this presentation and this report being presented to the full board. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is, I think the work is that strong and it warrants it. Secondly, the board has said it several times, when can we hear from CFC? When can CFC come and do a presentation for us?
Really? We have fans?
We've had that a few times. We've also had, what about tutoring? You know, people have different ideas and, you know, subcategories of tutoring that people are interested in. Mm-hmm. So what I'm thinking is, give the board what they want. Imagine Chairman Kohler coming and giving a general presentation about here's what CFC is working on, update to the charter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, it's funny, Kathleen, they don't want to take it from us. They want to hear it directly. The board will come out.
Like the parents, when something, the kids are like, okay.
Nobody called.
But I'm not saying, you know, your overview doesn't have to be super long. I think if you overview and then you introduce, you know, the Bob and Michelle EBF sub team to do a presentation like this. That also doesn't have to be super I mean, an hour of quality presentation discussion. I think they're going to check this out. But that to me would be how we take this excellent work and make sure it doesn't just get put on a shelf and collect dust. Where it goes from there, I think very much depends on the dialogue with you and the plans and so forth. So I'm not trying to write any script for the administration, but that to me, that is the next step.
Yeah, if I can add in a few things as well. I know there's been a lot of praise for this, but I want to underscore. I would bet there is not another school district in the state that has anything like this analyzed for its administrative team and board to chew on. Right? It really is an investment that is well above adequacy for a PFC. It really is. So I'm really appreciative of that. There's such clarity in how this was all mapped out too, and such kind of thoughtful nuance in how to kind of interpret, analyze, and apply this, that it is incredibly approachable. So I really want to underscore the thanks that you've heard already for this. To a few things that were shared, I have some wonderings and but also or some questions, but also to one of Graham's points, I think that's right. Sharing this with our district leadership team and Dr. Hester is certainly part of that. But you know, that's mentioned right now within the context of an upcoming board conversation. There are other members, in fact, almost every single member of our district administrative team is directly linked to information in this report and our growing understandings of this. And so question for me is not, Dr. Hester, how to get this information from the person so you can chew on it. Yes, a lot of this is instructional, but we have all sorts of people who are touching instruction in various ways on that team. And so the question is bigger than that, and it's one regardless of whatever next paths the boards or whatever emails go out, our admin team can chew on. I will also add, it was just not by design, by chance today, Dr. Hester brought to our admin team a preliminary view of what is going to be coming to the board in May. And there is alignment in ways other than just we've seen previously with the instructional coaching here. So yeah, I think, and my question is about a comment, Michelle, I think it was yours, about in some places in this report, it might be useful to consider 3-year rolling averages rather than what's going on in a specific year. I wonder if that might be like in some ways a general approach. And I think about that, Graham, in terms of how we would apply this as the admin prepares to have conversations with the board. When does this happen? How does this go, right? So if you think about that staffing report, I think it is that we gave recently to the board, it's going to almost always be impossible for us, at least to my understanding of how the state's going to get this, for us to get this information from the state for the current school year, analyze it, have it at our fingertips, and ready to go for when we make staffing decisions, each spring to the board. But if we recognize the value really is in those 3-year rolling averages, once we have more reports like this, we will have just a solid bedrock of what's really going on in this district to kind of anchor our thinking on, rather than that noise. And so that would mean in some ways that as we have conversations at the board table with our own admin team, how we begin to think about these things well in advance of, the spring staffing report is a point, right? And gobs of conversations that are going on that kind of shape the decision at that point. And this should be something that's part of the conversation productively, fall through spring. So that's a conversation to have. I thought it was thought. I know a lot about the EDF model. We've seen it, but I've seen presentations both at ISB and at the West 40, our local regional office of Ed and West Cook. But I learned a lot from this too today. So I really am appreciative, and we'll keep playing.
And I would just say, I will always endeavor to remain in my board member balcony. But my interest in this, as just speaking as one board member, is less about satisfying the adequacy percentages to the state and more about the 2 lead impactful strategies as supported by data that we've identified, which is instructional coaches and tutoring. And so that's what I'm kind of, really going to be interested in understanding what can be done in those areas. Again, from my balcony perspective.
I think it's also important, as you were talking about, potentially using it in your spring staffing report, is that the dollars for EBF for school year 26-27 are based on a lagging 3 years of enrollment. And so you need to build your staffing for what's going to be enrolled going forward. If it's lower, maybe you can cut back from the EBF numbers if it's higher. And so that's another part of this where the comparisons give you some white lines, but to use it proactively is not something that the numbers should be used for without the local adjustment of, we're projecting an extra 50 students or an extra, or we've done our testing and we now think we're going to have 300 struggling students, whereas last year we had 400, or whichever direction it goes, is that something in the long-term planning has to be, how do you project what the inputs are going to be so that you can use them for staffing decisions instead of saying, every year in arrears, oh, we were off, we were too high or too low. You want it, you're chasing something that won't exist again.
And no, after sharing with your district leadership team, you know, we are happy to connect. I think that the research part is important in terms of, you know, them being able to understand, well, how would you implement this, right? And a lot of the underpinnings, you know, besides comprehensive school reform is, you know, these other studies. And so talking through those, I think would be really helpful for them, because that's like the lens that they're thinking through, you know. The main authors on the Picus are, you know, have done school district, like successful district studies that a lot of this comes from. So it's not just academic studies, but also practitioner-based studies, and as well as just school improvement research. So I think that it's not really just about the dollars at the end of the day. It's about how has that worked in real schools.
And I also think is the two slides at the end sort of indicate is there's potentially two tracks. One is about the instructional research-based elements of things, and the other is the more financial state average part of things that, you know, frankly, there wasn't a research base for, they were just state averages. And so, you know, those are very different people potentially that need to be looking at those because the conclusions are different. The instructional ones you need, read up on, the efficacy of different tutoring programs and coaching programs. O&M, where it's an average, that is not, definitely your buildings can impact instructional outcomes, but it's a lot less direct.
Yeah, also just, we started the meeting this way. I think it's great as we get here towards the end. Anything you'd like to share, Tyson?
I just would say it's a really good report, but also just to know that, like, I feel like a large group of people can fall into so many different categories. So I think while it's a really good tool to use, I think just noting like how depending on where you put people in different buckets, like your numbers can wildly change. So just keep note of that. But
thank you. I actually, it's such an important point. We have never presented the EDF report to our Board of Education with the exact same allocation and staffing from the year before, because there's always different voices coming in saying, tweak it here, do this, and the other thing. And so it would be really nice if those 3-year rolling averages I described are gonna have any validity for us, right?
Yeah.
And we need to this is the rules of the game, and we know they're complicated and they're flawed, but this is just what we're doing, okay?
Yeah, and also I think it matters much less who's in which bucket and much more that the buckets are stable over time so that we can continue to make the same comparison.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right, so we wanna kind of set this now.
Yeah, I think that would be great.
Right, and a related issue to that is potentially tweaking some HR categories so that something in your HR database that says, here's this person's assignment, and then it could have the EBF bucket that they're in. And so that way, you're assigning it and you can run that report consistently. As we were talking about, might want to do something different with how the subs are tracked, or there are ways to modify the budget so that it aligns with things and you don't have to take a single budget line item and break it up after the fact. You think about ahead of time, here's this line item and do it. Easier said than done, which is why it would be in the 3 to 5 year range. But there is something to be said about having some of these line items match up with things. For instance, I was trying to find, just the crude budget item for remedial help. It's just like, I can't tell what's in this. And so there may be ways to improve transparency by, now that this looks like it's going to be in place in the state for, 5, 10 more years, of tweaking some of the budget line items so that they better align with the reporting you want to do out of them, instead of doing after the fact saying where these people go and do other things.
If they press for, at your request.
Or you take that with,
Can I?
If you don't have a date now, it's fine.
No, I don't think we have a date, because it would depend on the upcoming agenda items, and Tim and Audrey set the agendas. That's on. So I don't know how the May agendas look, if there's space. I mean, I would say probably the sooner the better.
Yeah, that general guidance will help. I actually meet with them this week. To go over all that, so May or June at the latest. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that'd be.
Oh, I'll add it right now.
Yeah, sooner you know, let us know. That we can decide who's gonna come and represent on that.
And I think that also, any type of presentation should be modified, footnoted by the presentation that Dr. Esper is doing in May, so that, after 10 minutes of conversation or 10 minutes presentation, the administration doesn't say, oh, by the way, you heard last month that we're changing all this. There may be ways to proactively include any new proposals into, well, here's what it was last year, here's what's projected to be for this year, how it's, changing, instead of just considering this a static report that will go as is. The administration's been working on a few things at high priority for the last 3 or 4 months.
Some of this got played. But no. Real quick, there, item 5 is just information only, so financial reports on a quarterly basis. See, Cal, we're at percentage 3 points on
Look,
we're out there.
So on this report, this is from February 28th, so one of them that have expired. So one of them have expired. We got 2 treasuries in here, paying out 1% and 0.7% from 2021. That's $7 million that we were getting 1% on. The high interest rate was 9% in 2022 during COVID. So technically it's about $3 million, but let's say it's like $1 million loss. We really need to watch this, because that's opportunity cost out the window. That's salaries, that's everything. That is, and we can blame it on Cindy or whatever, but I don't know if you guys can sell anything, or I don't know if you guys can liquidate something, but when you have something in here paying 0.7% and the interest rate is 9%, it's easy to just call whoever you deal with this and say, get us out of it and get us into something else. If it's not at 9%, if it's at 5% or something, you have to. This has been on the books for 5 years. $3 million up in smoke just from interest alone. On the high end. On the low end, $1 million. But I think this would be a good idea for a subcommittee to go over this every quarter to make sure we're in line. Because right now the IBOR rate is 4.3%, and with oil and gas going up, it's going to be 4.3 at the end of the month. It's 4.03 now. It's going to be 4.3 at the end of the month. And everything here says 3. And there's a lot of stuff expiring coming up in the coming months. So
We reference I-bonds a lot. We're not allowed to invest in I-bonds.
I know we're not allowed to invest in I-bonds, but we can use that as a reference. You have to call these people. They're charging you fees. And we have to be diligent in making sure that they're helping us out. I'm not telling you guys to wake up every morning to look at the Wall Street Journal and see what we should be trading. No. But we have money managers that do this for us, just like we had this woman come and do this grand presentation telling us, you need to borrow this money right now. And we didn't have to borrow the money right now. We borrowed it in pieces as we needed.
But she told us, we have to tell them what we wanna do. You have to tell them what we wanna do. Because if this is the case, $3 million up in smoke and then everything else, we're not investing and they just come and put us in on stuff. We have to have a reference of, okay, what securities do you have for us? We have X amount of money to invest. And if it's not in line, find something else or something, you're gonna call somebody else. There are a bunch of money managers that will manage $60 million. So, that's all.
Yeah, but Cal, like the options districts have to invest in.
I know.
Are very limited and
Very
there's
limited.
nothing that the
I-
district could have put money in to get 9% in
I-
2021.
Okay, and I said, that's at the high point. What about 4%?
You're
We could have done
investing in
something at 4%.
treasuries and CDs, which are all in the 3.5% to 4% range.
But everything was high then. I'm not saying we missed it. I'm not saying we missed it, but I'm saying we could at least get, okay. We don't need 1% on here,
But-
right? Or
Go-
0.7.
Go back a page and look at the graph here. Though.
I know the graph.
Rates were at 0 and they were able to get 1%.
I know we got 1%, but liquidate it. It's high.
But
I
once,
mean,
once
it's-
rates are 3%, nobody wants a 1%. You're gonna take a big loss. So,
At some point in time, there is a cost to carry.
but you do have to evaluate.
I'm just saying we have to evaluate options. Because yes, I'm not saying rates were 9%, you guys sold something 1%, but
That's it.
we have to be more diligent. That's all.
You're good.
Thank you.
But that is any future agenda items, next steps, house definition, page report. There are future agenda items you can think of at this moment, off the top of your head.
We have a date for our next meeting.
Oh, next meeting,
Just wondering what you have in mind and stuff.
Well, I just know we're getting into budget season, so we'll have preliminary budget information coming up in the near future. Jump on the calendar to.
next meeting is June 16th.
Yeah, June 16th.
Let's talk budget in June for sure.
And budget always goes with investment.
All right. Back, I get a motion to adjourn. Motion. Second. All in favor, Jack? Aye. Motion carries.
Calendar already.